Um, so let's go ahead and go into the text and begin our process of looking at the rest of this text that we're going to cover tonight. Um, whoops, hit the wrong button here. There we go. Okay. All right. So again, we are actually, I think it might be better to start with the outline. Maybe let's start with the outline and kind of where we are and get oriented with that. So let me pull that up on the screen. Again, we're in this whole second section of the text. We dealt with earlier conventional bodhicitta. Last week, we entered into the topic of ultimate bodhicitta. We looked at how this is how we'll actually attain the results of our practice, how we actually accomplish Buddhahood is by realizing emptiness, realizing that everything, ourselves included, lack inherent existence. Everything lacks that quality that we mistakenly believe is there. So we're in the section of 104 through 114. We just began this. We're in the middle of verse 105. But the idea here is that all appearances are empty of inherent existence. Everything appears to have that quality, and of course appears as conventional phenomena, but everything is empty of inherent existence. There isn't an iota of inherent existence. And what we've been working with in particular is this idea of there being this illusory quality to things then, that things appear to exist in one way, but that they actually lack that, in the same way that these various examples of illusion, of things that have that kind of trait or characteristic to them. So again, we're in this section. This was the verse that led us into this, the idea of dependent relations, dependent arising. I'll read it really quickly. Aha, all these are dependent relations. Dependent relations are dependent and not self-sustaining, unlike what we think everything is, what our ignorance holds everything to be, independent and self-sustaining. So things lack that because they are dependent arisings. They don't have those qualities. They cannot stand on their own. Then it says, changing back and forth, they are illusory false appearances, like a whirling firebrand. They are reflections that appear. So this idea of like a firebrand that somebody's whirling in the dark, it looks like a circle, but it really isn't a circle. There's no circle of fire. There's simply the point to the firebrand that is being circle in a circular motion. So this is the idea of dependent arising. Last week we went through the 3 levels of dependent arising. And it's interesting because, again, most of the examples that we've been working with are coming from the vantage point of the very first level, that things depend upon causes and conditions to arise. Things like the bubble and the mist and all these various things that we've already talked about. They have causes and conditions that cause an appearance to occur, and they depend upon those causes and conditions. That makes them, completely lacking any independent quality, because they have to depend upon those causes and conditions for their existence, for them to arise. And of course, the implications of that are that then they also depend upon their parts. And then at the subtlest level, they depend upon mere imputation or designation. So we label something as mist or as a bubble or as a banana tree or all these different examples. They don't have any inherent existence whatsoever. They are merely imputed, merely designated to that basis. So this is the idea behind dependent arising. But as I said, this first level is what's really being pointed to in this part of the text for most of these examples, to show that things that depend upon causes and conditions cannot exist in the way that they appear. They are illusory in that way. So I thought I would share just a couple of verses from a text by Lama Tsongkhapa, and I'm not going to comment on these a whole lot, but it kind of reaffirms this whole idea that even that first level of dependent arising points to emptiness. So Tsongkhapa says, he has like a quote within his verse, whatsoever depends on conditions, that is devoid of intrinsic existence. So you cannot have any intrinsic or independent or inherent existence if something depends on conditions. What excellent instruction can there be more amazing than this statement? This was Tsongkhapa's praise to dependent relation, to dependent arising, and praising the Buddha for teaching this. This is an excellent instruction that gives you the exact middle way, where we learn that things that arise just on the basis of their causes and conditions also must lack inherent existence. Of course, there are in traditional Buddhism many schools of thought that don't hold that. They think that things arising on causes and conditions is still being able to be upheld within their having intrinsic existence. But
This is really nice.
but anyway, Tsongkhapa is essentially saying that you cannot have any intrinsic existence if there's any level of dependence. Then another verse later in that text, Tsongkhapa says, therefore, whatever originates dependently, though primordially free of intrinsic existence, appears as if it does possess intrinsic existence. So you taught all this, all this meaning everything that ordinary sentient beings deal with, to be illusion-like, to be illusory. Again, we don't say that they are purely illusions because things do exist, but they exist in an illusory way. They appear to exist in one way, and they don't exist that way at all. So this was, again, just reaffirming what we're getting into in terms of this verse 105 that demonstrates these various examples of an illusory type of appearance. So these are the first 4 lines that we dealt with last week. Remember the banana or the plantain tree that has no real solid essence in the trunk of it. Rather, as you pull at it, you don't find anything that's kind of a pure essence to it. And this was talking about our life force also being the same way, that we have our life, but there's no real inherent essence to it because it is subject to change. It is also changeable, dependent upon causes and conditions. Like a water bubble, there too, our life is without essence because a water bubble can burst at any time. It develops on the surface of the water and then it comes into contact with something and it's gone. So too are our lives like that. Then, like mist that appears in the sky, things dissipate when touched. When you go to kind of reach out to what looks like it's so solid in terms of this misty appearance, there's nothing really substantial that you can find. And that too is arising once more from its causes and conditions. Why does mist appear? Due to a variety of things happening with the wind and the air and the water and the air and what have you. And then a mirage was the last one we looked at last time. A mirage, of course, appears when you bring together all of these various causes and conditions. A hot summer day when the sun is directly overhead, a flat landscape with a desert, and the appearance of what looks like water on the surface in the space before you. That is actually a mirage. It doesn't exist as water. This is one of the more famous ones that's used by the Buddha to show how things can appear to exist in one way and they don't exist that way at all, which is, again, what we're working with in this verse. We got 2 more lines to this verse that give us 2 more examples. Let's go on to those. The next one is like a reflection in a mirror. They appear to be really true. This is also one that the Buddha used frequently. And let me go ahead and show the last one, and then we'll go to the commentary on this. Like a cloud and fog, it seems that they will really stay. So when we see like huge masses of clouds, fog, when I lived in San Francisco, there was always lots of fog that would come in off the ocean. It seems so substantial, again, that it will really be there and stay there. But it, of course, is subject to causes and conditions as well, and eventually dissipates, and we don't have that appearance any longer. So this is the nature of all of these things in our conditioned world, is that they arise on the basis of these factors, and then they don't last. They don't have an ability to sustain themselves. If there was an inherent quality to them, they would be able to do that without a doubt. So let's go ahead and go to our text and go through what Geshe Gyatso, my teacher in Italy, his commentary on this. So here we actually have to go to the next page, which I believe is page 43 of your text. It's about right in the center of the screen there. When between the collection of the two, a polished mirror, and the face of a being who is, of course, looking into the mirror, there is no obscuration that acts to obscure and the like. In other words, there's enough light in the room. There's nothing between that person and the mirror. Then the reflection of the face falls upon the mirror. Due to this, a real face appears as though it actually exists inside the mirror. But in reality, it does not. Of course, most of us, we were quite young. Maybe we were fooled by a mirror, but as an adult, maybe we don't get fooled by a mirror so easily. Though there might be times when that still might startle us, that we see our reflection from a distance. But it says there again, with this example, similarly, although phenomena also appear as though they are really true, there does not exist even a mere part of the hair of a horse's tail split into 100,000 pieces. In other words, an atom. This is a colorful way of talking about even there being an iota or an atom that is established on the object. So this is, again, one example that shows that even though we can have the appearance of something, such as my hand that's appearing on the screen, of course, it's just little uh, pixels and things on your screen as well, but my hand appears to have some substantial existence as a hand, but it is arising on the basis of all these various factors. And of course, the appearance of it on your screen is depending upon things similar to a mirror, right? My hand is being reflected into the camera, and the camera is being broadcast through Zoom and coming out into your own device there, whatever you're watching this on. All of these causes and conditions cause you to see my hand. But it seems like it's sort of substantially there, but it's, again, arising on the basis of a variety of factors. And even my hand, without it being broadcast via Zoom, is also the same. Everything that arises upon causes and conditions cannot stand on its own. But this is what our ignorance is grasping to. It thinks that things have their own substantial existence, that they exist independently. And this is what causes us to think of ourselves that way and react to the world around us in ways that are not helpful, as well as to hold everything that exists to be that way. And this is what our wisdom of emptiness is trying to undermine, is to get us to realize that these things are not existing in the way that they appear. So now about the middle of that paragraph, it says, for example, when there is the opportunity to view a great mass of cloud in the sky or thick, dense fog halfway up a mountain, although the cloud or fog appear as though they will really stay for a while, they in fact vanish in an instant without trace. Sometimes it might take more than an instant, but it's certainly they are changing. They're going through a process of appearing to be more substantial. If you've ever been in like an airplane up in the flying through clouds, and of course, oftentimes you have to go up and down through them when you're, taking off and landing. But the idea is that they seem so substantial from a distance, but you go through them and it's just, there's nothing there. It's just all this mist that has collected in the sky, again, based on causes and conditions. So then it says, similarly, when compounded phenomena, I should say, are also not investigated and not analyzed, they seem as though they will stay. But when investigated, they are objects that quickly disintegrate without staying even one instant after another. So it's interesting. The examples that have been pointed out here, might seem to point more to kind of showing us impermanence. Impermanence and emptiness do play a role with each other. And it's the idea that if we begin to acquaint ourselves with impermanence, first of all, that's very helpful because we're holding to the opposite there too. We think things have some sort of permanent, unchanging quality when actually they're changing momentarily. All these conditioned things in our world. Look at our bodies. They seem so solid and sort of unchanging. But yet if we analyze things over time and go looking back at earlier photos of ourselves, we can see that change has obviously occurred. And it didn't occur after just like that period of time. It was occurring momentarily throughout all of that. The realization of impermanence precedes the realization of emptiness. But the realization of impermanence alone is not sufficient. We have to also get this idea that that is pointing to their lacking a substantial identity. They cannot then set themselves up. Everything that is conditioned in this way, including ourselves, cannot have any sort of inherent or intrinsic existence because otherwise we would be unchanging. And the fact that we are changing points to that reality, to the fact that we cannot therefore exist independently on our own substantially. So that's the idea behind this, again, is although it's pointing to things that have to do with being conditioned, having to do with, causes and effects and what have you, this is not the realization we're aiming for. We're aiming for that to be the doorway to recognize that things don't have any intrinsic or inherent existence. So I want to share a little bit from Venerable Thupten Chodron's book, Good Karma, that is a commentary on this text, The Wheel of Sharp Weapons that we're studying. All these examples illustrate false appearances. They appear to exist one way, but in fact exist in another. That reflection of a face isn't a real face. It's still functions as a reflection. If we didn't have the reflection of our face, we couldn't comb our hair and, take a look at our faces and see, what's changed and what we need to, address or whatever, if we have dirt on our face. But, that's the way it exists, but it doesn't exist as a real face, as some beings might think when they first, see that reflection. Similarly, all phenomena appear to have their own inherent nature, although they do not. Remember, this false appearance is coming from the imprints of ignorance. It is a subtle propensity in our minds that causes things to appear to exist from their own side. And then we agree to that. Remember, we went through that process last week. She continues and she says, while such inherently existent things do not exist, dependently arisen things do. Since things function and causes produce their corresponding effects, we must pay attention to the actions we do, for they cause the experiences we will undergo. So this is re-emphasizing one of the main themes of this text, which is to pay attention to what we are doing, our actions. We had that whole section about addressing our karma, the wheel of sharp weapons that we create through our own bad actions that come back around, it comes back around to harm us. And then we had the whole other section that was talking about all of the behaviors and characteristics that we have that are also karma that we then create causes for our own suffering. So we have to heed the law of cause and effect because things still function within causality. Emptiness doesn't mean they don't exist at all. It means they don't exist intrinsically, inherently, independently. They do exist, and therefore we have to pay attention to them. So let's go on to the next verse. The enemy, the self. Remember, this is a phrase that we saw in those earlier verses. The enemy being the main problem we have, self-grasping, which is what is being addressed in this section, talking about the wisdom of emptiness. That grasping at ourselves and all phenomena to have an inherently existent identity. And the executioner, the text says, remember the executioner is self-cherishing, which is a coarser mind, but one that we were addressing in the first part of the text, that tendency to be solely focused on our own welfare. So the enemy, the self, and the executioner, self-cherishing, are also like that. They seem to really exist, yet have never been experienced to exist truly, independently, inherently. They do exist, but they don't exist in the way they seem or the way they appear. The next line, they seem to be really true, yet are never experienced to be true at all. They seem to really appear, yet have passed beyond being objects of superimposition and deprecation, superimposing inherent existence, which is what our ignorance is doing, or deprecating mere existence, which is what this extreme view of a sort of nihilistic bent. Sometimes we hear these teachings on emptiness and we think, oh, nothing exists at all then, and we deprecate reality. And that's what Venerable Tipton Chodron was talking about in that previous slide, right? Was that we need to not deprecate reality because things do exist still. Regardless of them not having any inherent existence, things function just fine. And we have to deal with the reality of how they function and so on. So let's go to what Geshe Jampa Gyatso, oops, did it again. There we go. Says on this verse, verse 106, the enemy, the grasping that is grasping at itself, the executioner that is appointed by that enemy, the self-cherishing, and the ancillary, the self that is the object grasped. Remember, they are both working with a self that is a very subtle way that we exist, just through mere imputation, mere designation, dependent upon causes and conditions and parts and so on. That's that merely imputed self that is the object grasped, is also like that. Everything that exists is like that, whether it be our self-grasping, our self-cherishing, our anger, our jealousy, our minds themselves, anything physical in the world, everything that is existing is indicated to be like those analogies, appearing to exist inherently, but lacking that entirely. So then it says, these two seem to a mistaken perception to really exist as truly established. But in reality, a mere atom of true establishment has never been experienced to exist. We cling to it all the time and it appears to us, but it's a false appearance, just like those examples that we just went through in verse 105. Also, as before, although all of them always appear to exist as really true, they have not been experienced to exist truly or ultimately at any place, any time, or in any situation. Even if the self and the self-grasping and so forth appear as though they are established from their own side as self-sustaining, apart from appearing in this way, once more due to a mistaken mind, changing them into another, changing that which is merely imputed into something that seems to be substantially real. He continues, they have not been experienced to exist even slightly as established by their own entity. So the wisdom consciousness of these great beings who have realized emptiness, as well as all the Buddhas and so on who have actualized that fully in their minds, have never found that to be true. They appear this way, but they don't exist in truth in the way that whatever phenomenon appears. And so again, this is what we're trying to realize through these teachings. And the reasoning of dependent arising, as I mentioned last week, is one of the most powerful ones because it helps us to understand how things actually only exist in dependence upon various factors. Therefore, they cannot have independent existence. So the last sentence then, Geshe-la says, because of that, ultimately, all phenomena have passed beyond being objects of superimposition and deprecation, whereby they are objects that are free from the superimposition of that which is superimposed, which would be again our idea of inherent existence, or the deprecation, thinking that things don't exist at all, annihilating them entirely through the wisdom of emptiness. We find that middle way through the reasoning of dependent arising that helps us to understand that things are dependent upon factors that makes them incapable of existing independently, and they have the arising. They do still come into existence, and that negates them being utterly non-existent. So then verse 107 has 5 lines actually to it. And the first line, Geshe-la kind of splits out separately and gives a commentary on that. This line says, given what we just said, that all these phenomena exist in this way of lacking any inherent existence, being empty of existing from their own side, what wheel of actions exists? It's kind of interesting they use the term wheel, which of course is the name of the text, right? The wheel of sharp weapons, the wheel of actions that we talked about earlier, where we commit an action and we create a sort of force of like a wheel, a sharp wheel that we've thrown out that will come back around to cut us. But it can also refer, of course, to the wheel of cyclic existence, which is taught in the 12 links of dependent arising. So Geshe-la says, this being the case, since the main causes that compel us to circle in psychic existence, namely self-grasping is the big root, the big problem, self-cherishing, which is another, again, delusional state of mind that causes us to hold our own welfare as more important than the welfare of others. Those things, all those things that cause us to circle in psychic existence are not truly established, he says. So we might ask, apart from being mere appearances, what actions and afflictions produced by self-grasping and self-cherishing, and what circling like a wheel in the abodes of existence as a result of their power, that is, what experience of suffering, exist established from their own side? What things can exist on their own independently? The answer is they do not exist. So again, most of us are familiar with the teachings on the 12 links of dependent arising. I don't have time to go into all 12 of those, but let me go ahead and share just a brief list of them. And again, these will all be in the slides that you'll have that I'll send on to John, and he'll send out to the Taoist list. Again, this is the pictorial of the 12 links of dependent arising in the wheel of existence. And so many of you have studied this with me or with other teachers. It demonstrates how we are circling in samsara under the control of various factors. The factors involved, Geshe is going to talk about a little bit. He says, in the context of the 12 links, the main cause of circling in psychic existence is said to be self-grasping, in addition to which there is self-cherishing. So the very first of the 12 links is ignorance. It is the ignorance grasping at me to exist inherently, to have an inherent self, as well as all phenomena to have inherent selves, to be able to have their own identity established from their own side. Again, this is Geshe-la's commentary on his own written commentary. So these are the 12 links. The very first one, ignorance, as I said, is self-grasping. We then commit an action. That action gets implanted on the consciousness, the third link, which eventually ripens into an existence where we have name, meaning the various mental components of our being, the physical form, our bodies. They have 6 sources that allow us to know phenomena through our 5 senses and our mental awareness. We come into contact with objects. Number 7, we then have feelings that arise on the basis of that, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And we have a craving and a grasping that especially arises at the time of death, but arises throughout this life. That becomes our default pattern. And once that craving and grasping happens at the end of a life, it nurtures the compositional action, the karma that we committed back in link number 2, which then becomes fully charged in link number 10. Which is called existence, which is a case of giving the name of the result to the cause. It's referring to a karma that has fully ripened, that is ready to take you into your next rebirth. And then you take birth in that new existence, and you age, and eventually you die. And if you haven't done anything to address your fundamental problem of ignorance, we start the whole chain over again with more moments of ignorance, more actions we commit, and so on. So that's all I can say about this tonight, because again, we just don't have the time to go into this teaching. But Geshela continues commenting on this verse, this line from verse 107. All these sufferings are mere appearances. That is, they are not established from their own side. Therefore, we need to realize selflessness or emptiness, whereby the wheel of psychic existence will come to an end, because we will have gotten rid of the first link. If we get rid of our ignorance, there's nothing remaining for the rest of the links to arise on the basis of, and psychic existence will come to an end. As he says, that is, we will become free from psychic existence, samsara. Okay, so then let's read the next verse. This is a remainder of verse 107, actually, the remaining 4 lines. Here, even if they lack such inherent existence, just as the moon disk, the reflection of the moon in the sky, appears in water, actions and results are arrayed as a multitude of falsities. They appear to exist inherently again, but they don't. And then Dharma-Rakshita, the author of Wheel of Sharp Weapons, says, for mercy's sake, adopt and discard these mere appearances. Again, adopt what needs to be adopted, discard what needs to be discarded, because we still have to pay attention to the law of cause and effect, as I mentioned earlier. Emptiness doesn't negate reality in its entirety. It just negates the false way that we are holding to reality, that we are grasping at reality, thinking everything is real in this fictitious way. But nothing has that whatsoever. It doesn't have that existence and never has had that existence. Remember the analogy of a dream. We're actually going to see this recurring a little bit later in the text, but a dream, when things appear to us in a dream, they seem so real. And because we don't have the awareness that they don't exist in the way that they appear, we have all kinds of emotions arising in our dreams. We can have fear, and we can have anger, we can have jealousy, we can have attachment, and so on. Well, it's all arising on the basis of a false appearance, something that seems to be real in our dream, but lacks that entirely. Without a doubt, there isn't a real object in our dream state, because when we open our eyes and wake up from that dream, there's nothing there. All those dream objects that we were dreaming about are gone like that. It's a similar analogy. Again, it's not exactly identical, but it's a similar thing in that we're holding everything to exist real. All these emotions are arising on the basis of it, but that's because we think it's real and it doesn't exist the way it appears at all. So this is, again, a very powerful analogy to use to realize this lack of inherent existence, that things can appear one way and actually not exist in that way at all. So here at the top of the screen, Geshela comments on the rest of 107, saying, moreover, here, those that appear as many, the self-grasping, causes and results, and so forth, lack the inherent existence that is establishment by way of their own characteristics. They're empty. For example, by the force of the two coming together, clear water that's on like the surface of a lake at night, and the moon disk in the sky, that is up above, that we can see the reflection of the moon in the water. Although the real form of the moon does not exist in the water, right? There isn't a moon on the surface of the water or in the water. it does seem to exist in it. And undeniably, the reflection cannot be stopped from appearing. Why? Because all the causes and conditions are there for the reflection to occur. If there were clouds obscuring the moon, or in some way we weren't, be able to, we didn't have the opportunity to see the surface of the water, then we wouldn't have that occurring. But because all the conditions are there, it's a clear night, we are looking down at the lake and we're seeing the reflection of the full moon in the lake, then we see it and it appears to be the real moon. So similarly, Geshela says, although the mode of actions and results, from the causes engaging in virtue and non-virtue arise the results, this and that, happiness and suffering. That's what we learn in our basic teachings around karma. Certain causes, such as engaging in virtue, bring about happiness, the result. Certain causes, such as engaging in non-virtue, bring about the result that is suffering. So the mode of actions and results is, in reality, Geshe-la says, not truly established. It is arrayed as a multitude of mere conventional falsities. Therefore, whatever appears cannot be stopped, because as long as the causes and conditions are there for us to commit those actions under the control of our ignorance and so on, then we get the results that are results of happiness and suffering within samsara. Because of this, actions and results as mere appearances are infallible. They do serve their function. They will bring about your future suffering or your future happiness in dependence upon the law of cause and effect, which is a dependent arising. Due to which, Geshe-la says, we should definitely try to train without confusion in the objects that are to be adopted, virtue, and discarded, which is non-virtue. So for mercy's sake, he highlights is an exhortation made to us out of, Dharmarakshita's mercy, his compassion for us. He sees us in this state of suffering where we're just going about under the control of our own ignorance, committing all these things and having to experience the results, because as long as we create the causes, we're going to experience the results without a doubt. So I do have actually a couple of verses I wanted to share on the slides. These are from Nagarjuna's text. Um, this is verse 20, chapter 24, verse 14. Nagarjuna's text is one of the most important texts in our traditions in terms of, or tradition in terms of teaching the middle way, the way that we can find this emptiness that allows us to uphold everything existing conventionally. So this is one translation of this. It says, for whom emptiness is tenable, for them, everything becomes tenable. Everything exists within emptiness. For whom emptiness is untenable, in other words, they say, oh, that emptiness means things can't exist at all. It's a refutation of mere existence. For them, everything becomes untenable. You cannot posit things to exist if emptiness means their utter non-existence. But because emptiness is simply negating their existing independently, we still uphold their dependent existence. Therefore, everything becomes tenable. Enlightenment is possible. The hell realms are possible. The God realms are possible. Everything that is experienced is possible within the sphere of emptiness. And it's always been within the sphere of emptiness. It's just that we are working with an ignorant mind that isn't open to that idea, that doesn't understand that idea. So then we go on. That was actually the only verse, that I needed to share on that. Go on to verse 108. Just as when a peat fire blazes as an object in a dream, even though it does not exist inherently, we are frightened by its heat. So this is the verse that had to do with a dream that I mentioned earlier. So again, if we have a peat fire in our, let's say you're like in a, well, maybe a house fire might be a better example. You have a dream where you're in your house and you think your house is on fire because that's what's happening in the dream. We might be totally frightened by it and, to figure out what we have to do to get out of our burning house. Likewise, although the hell realm and so forth do not exist inherently, frightened of the massive sufferings of being boiled and burnt, we should abandon them. So it's the same logic. If you have a fire in your dream state, you still pay attention to it and kind of, react to it within the understanding of, that still can cause fear to arise and so on. It isn't real in the way that it appears. But nonetheless, the idea of in our waking life, we have all these things that are appearing to us and they induce certain states of emotion and what have you. We have to be respectful of that. It doesn't mean we throw all of that out. when we come to understand what emptiness means. We have to be attentive to the law of cause and effect within the understanding of emptiness. So let's go to Geshela's text and see what his commentary on verse 108 is. He says, for example, for some beings, due to the fault of their being afflicted by sleep, a peat fire strongly blazes as an object in a dream, and the appearance of their body and so forth being burnt arises. Then also in actuality, they shout out, perspiration arises on their body and so forth, become very fearful, having that worry about the danger of this dream fire. Then also in actuality, he says, oh, I'm sorry, I already read that part. The next sentence, next line. If this is seen by people unafflicted by sleep, so say you're watching somebody who's having this dream, since it is not possible for them to see even just a trace of the fire, in reality, it does not exist inherently. Again, that's why, again, a dream object is a wonderful example, because somebody else watching you dream, or even, again, your waking mind coming out of the dream, realizes that it doesn't exist inherently or have any sort of substantial existence because it is a mere appearance to your dream mind of a dream object. Then he goes on to say, however, even if that is the case, from the perspective of the person afflicted by sleep, the strong appearance of heat to his or her body, the appearance of fear to their mind that are produced, undeniably exist, right? They still do that. They still have that function of inducing fear in you, of inducing, this, mind that is wanting to be free of that imaginary suffering. So the hell realm is similar, he says, as well as the hungry ghost in the animal realms, the other lower realms, which are indicated by saying and so forth. Moreover, the fires, the incandescent iron foundation in the hell realms, the weapons that are there in various hell realms and so forth of hell, in reality also do not have even a mere atom that is inherently established. And of course, we can say the same thing for the human realm. All these things that we have in our lives, they are appearing through the force of the karma and so on that we've created, all of the causes and conditions that have led to them being there, but they are not inherently established. This is why our existence is like a dream. It isn't a dream, but it is like a dream. So it's not like that nursery rhyme, life is but a dream. No, life isn't a dream. Life is like a dream. Nonetheless, Geshela says, they cannot be stopped from the perspective of a person who has accumulated bad actions, and the sufferings of being boiled, burnt, and the like are undeniably experienced. Everything is still experienced within the sphere of emptiness, things lacking inherent existence. Then Geshe-la concludes this section saying, therefore, through being frightened and terrified of the mass of unbearable suffering results, we should definitely abandon their causes, negative, non-virtuous actions, without ever engaging in them. As I said earlier, remember that this is, without a doubt, one of the key themes of this text, that we saw all of that attention being paid to karma in the beginning. Like I said, this wheel of sharp weapons that through our actions we send out, our bad actions, this force that comes back around to harm us. We send it out to harm others, to get at them, but we are creating the karma by which our own downfall occurs. None of that is negated within the understanding of emptiness. All that is negated is it existing inherently. It still exists. Suffering exists without a doubt. Happiness exists without a doubt. Buddhahood exists, sentient beings exist, all of these things exist. They just don't exist in the way that they appear. And the way they exist, again, is very, very subtle, very slight, because they only exist through mere designation, mere imputation. Merely imputed sentient beings have an experience of merely imputed life in a merely imputed hell realm. But it's still merely, it's suffering that they experience, albeit merely imputed suffering. It's still suffering. It's still unsatisfactory. So, we often talk about the equality of samsara and nirvana. We're not meaning at the level that both of these are, indistinguishable in terms of their conventional appearance. They're very different. In terms of their ultimate existence, absolutely, there's no distinguishing because they are both empty of inherent existence. the Buddha realm is empty of inherent existence. The hell realms are empty of inherent existence. But if I had a choice between which one I'd want to be in, without a doubt, I'd choose the Buddha realm. Thank you very much. Because the hell realm conventionally is a suffering existence that arises through its causes and conditions. So we're getting a kind of repetition of this idea in this section, really kind of pointing out again how we have to be able to uphold an understanding of conventional reality, conventional truth within the understanding of emptiness or ultimate truth. So let's continue a bit more and then we'll take our break. Verse 109, just as when, even though there is absolutely no darkness, delirious with fever, it is as though we were roaming about and suffocating in a deep cave. He's describing some form of an illness where we're kind of experiencing through fever and what have you, a delirious sort of condition where we have these imagined experiences, hallucinations that occur. I've not had this happen with an illness. I've had it happen with Tylenol with codeine when I had surgery once, and they give you this stuff to take, and you end up like having these weird experiences that under the control of that medication. At least I did. But anyway, the idea is that this is what's happening, right? We're having this sort of illusory experience within emptiness. Likewise, although ignorance and the collection do not exist inherently, we should eliminate this error by means of the three wisdoms. So there's quite a bit in this verse. Let's go ahead and get into Geshela's commentary on it so we can understand everything that's involved with it. So at the beginning, that first part, the analogy in the first two lines. So when a person, for example, who is tormented by fever and the like, becomes delirious by the force of their illness, although there's not even the slightest darkness in the sight of people who are not sick, from the perspective of that sick person, there arises the appearance of roaming about a deep cave in complete darkness, the appearance of suffocating in complete darkness. Again, that was very similar to what I experienced when I was taking Tylenol with codeine. Always felt like I was suffocating when I was under the control of that substance. My mind having that condition that led to that experience that again wasn't a real experience, but nonetheless an experience. It caused that level of suffering. Similarly, when the eyesight initially diminishes, even in people like ourselves who have obscured eyes, although in reality there does not exist even the slightest smoke, from our perspective, the appearance of a lot of suffocating smoke arises. Like this, although the collection of afflictions in general, such as ignorance and so forth, and in particular, the error that is self-grasping, that again is at the root problem, are in reality not inherently established. Nonetheless, conventionally, he says, they act to produce however many bad actions, sufferings, and so on there exist. So again, it's similar, like being under the control of all of this sort of fever and this stuff going on. We have this sort of experience, even though there really isn't darkness around us or the suffocating smoke in the room or what have you. We experience that on the basis of causes and conditions, but it's not real in the way that it is experienced by that person, because the person who isn't under the control of that fever doesn't see any darkness or any suffocating smoke or what have you. So then Geshe-la continues on. He says, because of that, as mere appearances, we should try to eliminate the main error, self-grasping, together with its imprints, which again is what's causing that false appearance, by means of the three wisdoms. Most of you have heard of the three wisdoms. It's a very important topic in terms of developing our Buddhist education. The three wisdoms are first, the wisdom arisen from hearing. In this case, that realizes emptiness, though we need this wisdom arising from hearing in regard to all of our Dharma teachings. The inferential cognizer that realizes emptiness, in other words, the thinking about it, the developing some understanding of it at a deeper level through reflecting upon it, analyzing it, doing all of the things we need to do with our conceptual mind to develop that. And then thirdly, the direct perceiver that realizes emptiness, which is sometimes called the wisdom arisen from meditation, which of course can begin in a conceptual vein, but eventually becomes non-conceptual. And that is what we mean by a direct perceiver. This is the experience that we are aiming for, is to have this direct perception of emptiness. And then alternatively, they are the wisdom arisen from hearing that realizes emptiness, from thinking, and then from meditation. That's their more common presentation. But if we get to the really fine detail, what we want is first to develop a conceptual understanding through hearing, and then an inferential cognizer through thinking about the teachings and developing a deeper conviction in them, and then directly realizing emptiness. So this idea of directly realizing emptiness, we're going to see some references to this coming up soon after our break. The idea behind this is that you do develop an understanding of emptiness initially at a conceptual level. Remember, our conceptual minds are working with things in a fictitious way. We work with ideas of things. Even right now, each of you, as you're hearing my words, you're developing in your own mind an understanding of emptiness. That is a conceptual idea of emptiness. That is the best way to know emptiness right now because we can't know it directly. We can't know it in an unfiltered way. That's what we call through the medium of a generic image or a mental image. And we're not just, again, with this, we're not talking about anything visual with the word image. We just mean it's an idea of it. You develop an idea within your conceptual mind. The conceptual mind is a very powerful tool because it can come to know things correctly, even though it might not know them directly. In fact, well, we'll get into the debate on that maybe in another class, but the idea here is that essentially the conceptual mind is always using an idea of something. Like again, just to, if we get out of the idea of emptiness and not work with that, just think, for example, of the taste of strawberries. I'm sure every one of you has tasted strawberries, unless you have an allergy to strawberries. Hopefully you don't. But then you could say maybe the taste of honey or the taste of blueberries or the taste of some other fruit, some other food. Okay, so we can bring that to mind as a mental image, right? You're not tasting strawberries right now, I don't think, or honey or any of these other things, but you can bring it to mind through the force of your conceptual framework. So conceptuality has a way of getting at objects in an indirect way. Eventually, through our working with hearing teachings about emptiness, thinking about them, reflecting on them in our meditation, eventually we get to a place where that idea of emptiness falls away and we know emptiness directly. This experience is what's called a meditative equipoise on emptiness, which we're going to see coming up shortly in the text. And in that space of realizing emptiness, the only thing that appears to the mind of that yogi or yogini who is realizing emptiness is emptiness in an unfiltered way, in a direct way, where we have the experience of this lack of inherent existence of the phenomenon that we've been analyzing, whatever it is that we've been looking at. Usually we start with looking at the I, the self, the person, and we begin to undermine that through our conceptual framework initially. And then, as I said, through the strength of our meditation, eventually it becomes direct. It becomes non-conceptual. And this is the what we're aiming for in our spiritual practice is develop what's called a yogic direct perception of emptiness. And we can, of course, realize other topics that way too. But the main one is to realize emptiness. Why? Because that's what's going to undermine that self-grasping, that ignorance. It's at the root of all of our problems. So this is what we're aiming for in all of our studies. And of course, in this section of the text, we're getting all these instructions about how to see things as dependent arisings, use these ideas of things not existing in the way that they appear to help us to get a stronger and stronger idea of what emptiness is. Continue to work with it with your conceptual mind, recognizing that that's not the final goal, is to realize it conceptually. It's to realize it directly. They say that that experience, it's like water poured into water. The object emptiness that we are realizing and the subjective awareness become indifferentiable. There's no longer any duality going on there. We have this experience of knowing emptiness at a very profound level. So anyway, give you a little preview of what's on your spiritual horizon for all of us. I don't have that realization. Don't mistake me in the way I talk about it. I talk about it purely from texts. So I have 702. Let's go to 712. So we have plenty of time to be able to cover the remainder of this text when we return. So again, I will ring the bell. So if you leave your speaker on, then you'll know it's time to come back. Otherwise, again, just keep an eye on your clock, and at 7. Okay, good. Oh, okay, we're all refreshed now, ready for the final bit of this text. So let's get back into Geshela's commentary, continue on where we left off. So again, this idea is that this is really what we need to work on, the wisdom that we need to develop if we are ever to experience our own freedom from suffering, much less help others to do the same. So again, we continue with a few other additional examples that give us this idea of how things arising on the basis of causes and conditions cannot possibly exist on their own. There's nothing findable about them that is sort of inherently there. Rather, they're a product of what is all occurring. So the example that's used in verse 110 is one that I was actually just listening to a CD of lute music earlier today. So it was kind of fun to have that experience of, while I was studying for this, to work with that. So when it wasn't a musician, there was no musician here playing a lute, but when a musician plays a song on a lute, the sounds, if analyzed, do not in fact exist inherently. But when not analyzed, the arisal of pleasant sounds by means of the collection dispels the anguish in the minds of beings. So again, when we analyze them, we find their ultimate nature. And that is what we mean by ultimate analysis, is to really figure out how things actually exist. Do they exist intrinsically, inherently, from their own side, self-established by way of their own characteristics? All these ways we describe that sense that we have that things do exist that way, but we don't find it if we look inherently. But if we leave it at a conventional level, like it says in the last two lines, when not analyzed, then yeah, there's an arisal of pleasant sounds on the basis of everything that's involved in the lute, and the musician's skill and the person who wrote the lute music that they're playing or whatever is all involved. By means of that collection, the pleasant sounds dispel the anguish in the minds of beings. They still function perfectly fine to produce beautiful sounds that can be very pacifying and calming. So Geshela says, when very skilled musicians in India and so forth compose sounds for a lute, the one I was listening to wasn't from India, but it was more of a Western music. But nonetheless, whatever sort of stringed instrument they might be playing in whatever culture, that is, when they play a song on it, he says, if those sounds are investigated and analyzed, they are found to not arise from the body of the lute alone. Similarly, they never arise from simply the strings alone, the skin of the body alone, the application of that person playing alone, and so forth. Since those sounds do not abide on them singly, in any one of them individually, they are in fact not inherently established. And sound is an interesting thing to analyze, to kind of really get at this idea that all we're experiencing is the vibration of molecules that is occurring on the basis of a variety of factors that lead us to have that experience of hearing beautiful music, not so attractive music, because we all have various things we like and don't like, and so on. So then Geshe-la continues, nonetheless, when they are not investigated and not analyzed, the sweet and pleasant sounds that arise in dependence on the collection of their causes and conditions dispel the anguish, that is, the suffering in the minds of beings, and produce joy in them. So music too is a dependent arising. It's just giving, arising on the basis of all these various factors. And when it occurs and we experience it, it produces its relative or respective effect on us, of pleasing music, displeasing music, what have you. So then verse 111 kind of continues with that analogy and says, similarly, when actions as well as causes and results are analyzed in their entirety, although they are not inherently one and not inherently different, which is another analysis we can do to see if something exists as the inherent individual thing that is that, such as the sound of the lute. The lute music, is it the strings? Is it the body of the lute? Is it the player? It comes from all those things. So it's not produced in any sort of individual intrinsic way. Nor is it inherently different, nor does the lute music come from something that is not all of those things, which of course would be kind of crazy if lute music came from none of those causes and conditions coming together. So then he continues, phenomena are produced and disintegrate as though really appearing, and the various happinesses and sufferings of our experience as though really existing. For mercy's sake, once more, adopt and discard these mere appearances. Don't keep holding on to things as if they're intrinsically existent, but don't deny their existence when you come to understand emptiness. That's again what a lot of this is trying to help us to find that middle way between those two extreme views, thinking things don't exist at all and thinking that they exist inherently. So here Geshela's commentary is pretty straightforward. As in the example of the lute just mentioned above, when the entire mode of causes and results, that is, the various forms of happiness and suffering, as well as the causes of that, the good and bad, arises from causes that are virtuous actions. I'm sorry, actually, the good and bad, yeah, is referring to the good situations and bad situations. So those are the results: happiness, suffering, good conditions, bad conditions. Those arise from causes that are virtuous actions for the happiness and the good, non-virtuous actions for the suffering and the bad, and so forth. When that's investigated and analyzed, these causes and results are never found to be inherently established as one substance or inherently established as different substances. Again, those are the only two possibilities. Either there's something that is identical to them, that is the same as them, that is a unitary thing that we can find, or they're completely different than those causes and conditions that lead to them. This is what we find with anything we analyze in terms of its existence. It either has to be one with some component involved in the basis of that phenomenon, or it is utterly different. There's no other option if it exists inherently. So then Geshe continues, nonetheless, as mere appearances, compounded phenomena have the conventional function of being produced, of disintegrating, and so forth. All those conventional things still exist just fine. Even when we do a deeper analysis, it doesn't deny their conventional existence. Moreover, here, appearing, that's in verse line C, so at the top of the screen, it says phenomena are produced and disintegrate as though really appearing. He says here, appearing is mentioned twice in the Tibetan, and it's not in our English, but it is in the Tibetan apparently, in order to indicate causes and results by saying appearing with respect to seeming results that arise from the seeming causes and conditions that appear. So as though, really appearing in reality, whether they are the causes, whether they are the results, these things that are, produced and disintegrate to all these various phenomena, again, lack any of that, even though they appear as if they're real, although they appear as if they have that intrinsic existence. So then he says, similarly, the last three lines here, put it up on the screen. Similarly, although the results, diverse types of happiness and suffering that arise from engaging in those causes do not exist inherently, they still are experienced as though they really exist. This is the meaning of saying, they cannot be stopped. Things cannot be stopped when the causes and conditions are in place. That isn't enough to, just try to wish them away at that point. If the causes and conditions are there, the experience will be there. That's how things work. That's how they function as dependent arisings in conventional reality. But they lack any inherent existence. This is what we have to get at, because we see them right now as being, those two things as being contradictory. We somehow think that if things exist in dependence upon factors and they have this kind of conventional way of appearing and whatever, that's denying that they have emptiness, that they have to have something intrinsic if they're going to appear in that way. But of course, this is our buying into that false appearance, our buying into our ignorance, our continuing to further that by having that conviction that things exist in the way that they appear. But if we do the deeper analysis, we can undermine that appearance and come to see it for what it is, a false appearance, and that things only exist through their dependence upon causes and conditions, their dependence upon parts, and in the end, that dependence upon mere imputation, mere designation, the subtlest way that we can find that things come into existence. And again, that will completely undermine our ignorance eventually, through our recognition of that fact. So, and then we can stop them, by actually undermining the initial cause that they all arise from, which is our own ignorance. So then he goes into a verse about like kind of how all of this stuff comes into existence. For example, when drops of water fill a vase, the vase is not filled by the first drop, nor is it filled by the individual drops, the last, and so on. Rather, the vase is filled by the collection of dependent relations. The continual water that goes into the vase that eventually becomes full on the basis of all of the drops. We can't say it's the last drop that filled the vase. You can't say it's the third or the eighth or the 90th or whatever. You can't say it's the first. It's filled by the collection of the drops, by all of this coming together, causes and conditions. So Geshela says on this, for example, even if a vase is completely filled by many drops of water, the vase cannot be filled by the first drop of water alone. Likewise, it is also not filled by the individual drops of water ranging from the second, third, and so forth through to the last. Nonetheless, when all the dependent relations of the first drop of water through to the last drop are collected together, that vase is filled with water, right? This is just what happens. As he was saying, things cannot be stopped. If all of the drops are there, if it's everything is there to bring the water up to the rim of the vase so that it is completely full, then you have a full vase, without a doubt. So once more, that analogy is the meaning of it and the application of it. So the Dharma-Rakshita says, similarly, whenever anyone experiences the results of happiness and suffering, it's not due to the first instance of the cause. Like say we have the result of happiness of receiving resources. Well, that was due to an act of generosity, but it's not due to the first instant of the cause. The thought of, oh, there's a person who's homeless, that recognition, that discrimination of them, and them asking you money or whatever. Nor is it due to the last instant when you actually gave the money to them. Rather, it's due to the collection of dependent relations. Happiness and suffering are experienced, or that's at least the completion of the cause. Once we plant the seed of giving that money to that homeless person, then that continues to grow and develop until eventually we experience the results. That karmic propensity is on our continuum and will eventually give rise to its fruition when all the proper causes and conditions are met, and then we receive money from our employer or from a friend or whatever, and that becomes the fruition of that initial cause, which is again not a single moment, but rather the continuation of all these things that led to it coming into full existence. So then the Dharma-Rakshita says, rather, due to the collection of dependent relations, happiness and suffering are experienced. For mercy's sake, once more, we get this line a third time, adopt and discard these mere appearances. Even though they are mere appearances, we still have to adopt virtue, and we still have to discard non-virtue, because all of these are upheld within emptiness. So Geshe-la, in his commentary on, what is this, 47, page 47, just as with the example of the vase and the drops of water, although the results of various virtuous and negative actions, which are happiness and suffering respectively, are experienced by the person, it is not the first instance of the cause alone that makes them experience them. Likewise, it is also not due to any of the individual instants alone, beginning from the second instant through to the last instant, rather by the force of all the former and later instants of dependently related causes and conditions collecting together, the results of happiness and suffering will also undeniably be experienced. So again, things, amass through all the causes and conditions coming into place, and the results eventually ensues from all of that. We can't find any sort of inherently existent cause, something we could point to as sort of a principal main thing that is that in a unitary way that is findable, identifiable, existing on its own. It's rather a dependent arising on the basis of all of those things happening. Even time itself, as we know from the law of cause and effect from karma, karma expands and increases. This is why even a small act, they say, like giving a morsel of food to an animal who, being that's born in the animal realm, just a morsel of food can ripen into millions of dollars in this human existence. Why? Because karma increases and expands. Through the force of all of that, you get this result that isn't inherently existent, and none of the causes are inherently existent. They all abide within the realm of dependent arising and are empty of inherent existence. So let's go on to verse 114. This is the conclusion of this section that we're in, of 104 through 114. Oops, sorry. This does that when I get too close to the end of the page in the PDF file. So Dharma-Rakshita says, oh, this appearance, which is joyous when left alone without investigation, is indeed without essence. So if we just leave things again on a superficial way and don't do the deeper investigation, we allow them to simply be accepted as conventional appearances, then yeah, joy is produced from various things, and negativity from others, and whatever. We have these various experiences, but they're all without essence. None of them have any inherent existence. They abide within emptiness. Then the Dharmarakshita keeps saying Geshela, coming up on Geshela's commentary. Here's Dharmarakshita, the last two lines. Nonetheless, this phenomenon that appears as though it exists is profound and difficult for the inferior to see. Of course, this is the reality that we've been under the control of these illusory phenomena and are adhering to them as if they were real since beginningless time. So it's very difficult to see these things. Even many of the inferior Buddhist schools hold to these things as if they were real, even though they apply many of the other Buddha's wisdom teachings. It's very hard for people to get to this very fine middle way, this razor's edge between these two extremes. So Geshe-la says, for that reason, we say, oh, having seen the way in which the two, appearance and emptiness, or we could call it appearance and reality, dawn without contradiction to be a source of very great amazement. This is the thing, is they are complementary. They are in no way contradictory. Without, as we saw in that verse that I shared from Nagarjuna earlier, right? For that person for whom emptiness is tenable, everything is tenable. Things only arise within emptiness. If emptiness didn't exist, if things were inherently existing, things couldn't come into existence and change and do all the things that they do. You couldn't become a Buddha because you'd be inherently a sentient being, never attaining the state of Buddhahood. Then it says, moreover, joyous when left alone without investigation is not like saying it is joyous when without investigation one stays alone without companions, as is the wish of some people. Rather, when the phenomena that are dependent relations are left alone, that is, left in their natural state without investigation, without a deeper, finer analysis, they can dawn as various phenomena, whereby joyous here means wonderful or amazing. How amazing that things come into these various experiences out of the sphere of emptiness, when various causes and conditions react on the basis of that. Okay, so with respect to those appearances, Geshe-la says, there is no essence that is inherently established. Not even, once more, this weird analogy, a mere part of the hair of a horsetail split into 100,000 pieces, which goes beyond my ability to imagine. But nonetheless, we're just talking about something that is extremely minute, an atom, again, an iota of inherent existence. So it goes on to say, even though this is the case, it should be understood that from the perspective of those polluted by self-grasping, those with ignorance like ourselves, phenomena appear as though they exist inherently. And of course, this is also those polluted not just by the self-grasping, but the imprints of that self-grasping, because bodhisattvas can remove that self-grasping, but still have this false appearance. These phenomena, Geshe-la says, are both empty and dependent relations, dependent arisings. One phenomenon helps another, and one carries another. These arise together. We often talk about these are essentially referring to what are called the two truths. You have conventional truth, which when we come to understand it is illusory. It's those things that appear to exist inherently, but they don't have that at all. And that's where they're really not truths in the way that ultimate truth is. Conventional truth is those things that appear on the basis of causes and conditions, whatever, all the things that cause them to arise, that we think exist inherently. We don't really understand how they actually exist. When we begin to analyze those conventional phenomena, such as the I, the person that we are, we come to see that it doesn't exist in the way it appears at all. It is empty of inherent existence. That's ultimate truth. And ultimate truth is always together with a conventional truth. In other words, there is the I, the person, and the emptiness of I. There is, the computer and the emptiness of computer. This is what we mean when we say the Heart Sutra, right? When we say form is emptiness, emptiness is form. We're not making them utterly equal and identical, but we're saying that without form, you cannot have the emptiness of form. Without the emptiness of form, you cannot have form. They arise and abide together. And that's the only way things come into existence, is within the sphere of emptiness. Every phenomenon is together with its own respective emptiness. You never can, you can mentally separate them. I can think about the emptiness quality and then the conventional way that they appear, but they never will be completely taken apart because they're inextricably bound up with each other. They mutually support each other. There's no way that you could, remove the emptiness of form and then still have form remaining. Because if there is form, there is emptiness of form. If there's emptiness of form, there's form. This is what we mean by that idea that Geshela is kind of pointing out in this little bit of this commentary. So where was I at? Last few lines here, I think. So it says then, this in fact, the fourth line from the bottom, is much more profound, even than the profound, due to which it is difficult for the inferior to see, that is, to realize. The inferior in this context are taken to be those who propound the tenets of the Svatantrika school, which is the other middle way school. Again, what we are studying, the view of emptiness here, is what's called the Prasangika school, which is the consequence middle way school, Prasangika Madhyamika. Svatantrika Madhyamika is called the autonomy middle school. And they go pretty far in what they negate, but they don't go this far. It's for them, this is a profound thing that they cannot realize either. And of course, Madhyamika, the middle way, is the highest of the four schools. So all of the schools below them are also incapable of seeing this profundity. Well, they can eventually if they adhere to the right teachings and investigate in the correct way. Just like all of us, we all can realize this. We just have to recognize that this is hard to get to realize this profound truth of emptiness. And of course, as it includes in the last statement there, non-Buddhists and ordinary heedless beings who do not adhere to any tenets. For anyone who hasn't had exposure to these teachings on emptiness, this is an extremely difficult truth to realize. And we have to give ourselves a lot of, kind of slack in terms of our own understanding of emptiness. It doesn't mean we should slack off and not do any investigation, but recognize that this is going to take a while to realize this truth. It means we have to do those three wisdoms. We have to, as much as possible, hear teachings on emptiness, read about emptiness. And there are amazing resources that are available in the English language to help us to do that. Then we have to think about it, contemplate it, reflect on it. And that's what we generally are doing in our meditation, but also can be done outside of meditation so that we begin to get a better and better idea of what emptiness is. That mental image of emptiness that's appearing to our conceptual mind becomes clearer and clearer and more accurate. And so that we eventually see the profound nature of emptiness conceptually. But to get it to the level that we have to, to remove it, means we have to go to the third level of wisdom, that which arises from deeper meditation, where we might know it initially conceptually, but eventually you get that experience of like water into water, where the emptiness and the mind knowing it become as one, because there's no duality, no differentiation. Because the differentiation is caused by an ignorant mind, because once more, they're inextricably bound up. That object that we are analyzing and the emptiness of it are part and parcel of the same thing. So let's go to the slides. I kind of adjusted the slides during the break so we would be at the place we needed to be. This is an alternate translation of that verse. It just was interesting. I like the way it was worded by Thupten Jinpa. He uses instead of oh. So utterly delightful when left unanalyzed, this world of appearance, devoid of any essence, seems as if it really does exist. Profound indeed is this truth, so hard for the weak to see. Again, our translation was done by my dear friend Ziggy To, who was in the master's program with me. I'm not criticizing her translation. It's just Thupten Jinpa has been around in the Dharma a very long time. He's been His Holiness's translator and what have you, Geshe himself. So the language is really quite nice, I think, in some of his translations, and I've tried to share them when I can. We're into the next section, verse 115, a single verse, our last three verses of this text. This is again the outline. It says, mind is empty of inherent existence. So the verse says, now, when absorbed in equipoise, remember that term I mentioned earlier, meditative equipoise, by means of meditative stabilization, how can even mere appearances definitely exist? Furthermore, how can the existent and the non-existent also exist? How can anyone anywhere assert there is and there is not? Okay, sounds really quizzical, right? Sounds like we're getting into a Zen koan kind of thing, right? So let's go into this a little more detail and work with Geshela's commentary first. So let me share that on screen and get into what this is essentially saying. Remember, as I said earlier, that in the wisdom realizing emptiness in this way, there is only the appearance of emptiness. No conventional phenomena appear at all. And that, again, was that experience of like water poured into water. So Geshe-la starts off by saying, thus, having finished settling the meaning of emptiness excellently, which we've done through these verses, come to understand what it really is referring to. It's not utter non-existence, nor is it adhering to any sort of fictitious existence. It's the emptiness of intrinsic, inherent existence. So that he says, then after that, we should absorb in equipoise, meditative equipoise, by means of meditative stabilization. That is, by means of focusing the mind single-pointedly on that very meaning. As I said, that's the process by which we develop that eventual direct realization. At that time, in the perspective of the appearance of that meditative equipoise, all conventional appearances are averted, whereby even mere appearances do not exist. So that's what's being said in that second line of our verse at 115. How can even mere appearances definitely exist in the face of that meditative equipoise? Because the only thing that is appearing to the mind of that yogi or yogini in meditative equipoise is emptiness in a non-conceptual way. No other phenomena can appear. So how can the existent exist in the third line? You see that the third line, there's two questions. How can the existent exist? How can the non-existent exist? And then there's going to be the last question, the last line. How can anyone anywhere assert there is and there is not? So we kind of have three questions that are being put forward here. And of course, the answer is no one can. But let's look at how they are defined first by Geshe-la in his commentary. So going back to that paragraph at the bottom there, how can the existent exist and so forth is meant as follows. From the point of view of the meditative equipoise that is absorbed in equipoise on the emptiness explained above, to say how can the existent exist means, in the perspective of that meditative equipoise, how can conventional appearances exist? The reality is if they were to appear to that mind, then they would be truly existent, because you are searching in your analysis for emptiness to find the inherently existent I or inherently existent whatever. And if you don't find it, then you find the lack of it, the emptiness of it. If it did appear, then you would have inherent existence, but you find only the emptiness of that object. It doesn't have any inherent existence. So the first question has to do with how could any conventional truths, any conventional appearances exist in the mind of that person in meditative equipoise? Then the second question that is also in line C, and to say how can the non-existent exist means, in the perspective of that meditative equipoise, the emptiness that is the ultimate truth is not non-existent. So when we say how can the non-existent exist, we mean how can the non-existence of emptiness exist? Because emptiness does exist and it is known by that meditative equipoise. So emptiness is not non-existent. I know we get into a lot of double knots, double negations, so it gets to be hard to discern all of this. But we'll pull up shortly some slides that go through this in another explanation from Geshe Chonyi. So that's the second one. How can the non-existent exist? Again, the non-existence here is the non-existence of emptiness, and it cannot exist in the same way that the first question, how can the existent exist? Well, the existent can't exist either in the face of that meditative equipoise. But emptiness doesn't not exist in the face of that meditative equipoise. It does exist because it is known directly by that mind. Then the last one, the third, which again was this fourth line. Let me go back. How can anyone anywhere assert there is and there is not? Geshe-la explains that similarly, in the perspective of that person, that meditative equipoise, that mind that is absorbed on emptiness, how can anyone anywhere also assert that there is or there is not true establishment and so forth? because there's no conventionalities that could exist in the face of that mind. There can be no assertions with regard to this exists, that doesn't exist, what have you. Those are all conventional language. Those are all conventional ideas. Uh, they are thoughts. And so in the face of that meditative equipoise, no thought is appearing. All that is appearing is the direct perception of emptiness. Such an assertion also does not exist even in the slightest. So I know this is really hard to get. I even spent a bit of time on it myself to refresh my memory when I had taught it the last time and all my little notes on it. Let's go to the slides and I'll share again what Geshe Choni says on this. He is the, first a little bit more from Geshe Gyatso on that last line. I forgot I included that in here too. So he says, at the time of being absorbed in the meditative equipoise and emptiness, there's no one anywhere who can assert either this exists inherently or that does not exist inherently. This is because when we're focusing a point on emptiness, we do not have such thoughts or conceptions, right? The conceptual mind is gone. It's a direct perception that is occurring at that time. So maybe that helps explain the last one. So now let's go through the three of these as Geshe Choni, who again is the abbot of Kopan Monastery right now, as well as teacher at ABC, Amitabha Buddhist Center in Singapore. Sorry, one more bit from Geshela, Geshe Gyatso. In other words, to the perspective of that meditative equipoise and emptiness, these assertions do not appear. All that appears to it is ultimate truth or emptiness. Okay, so this is commentary from Geshe Choni. How can either existence or non-existence exist? Okay, so the first part of that, how can existence exist, means that to the appearance factor of the wisdom realizing emptiness directly, there's no conventionality at all, right? Conventionalities aren't appearing. The only thing that is appearing is emptiness. So existence here refers to the fact that conventionality does not exist to the appearance factor of the wisdom realizing emptiness directly. It's not that it doesn't exist at all. It just doesn't exist in the mind of that meditative equipoise, the yogi's mind that is meditating on emptiness in this way. The second part of that line C, how can non-existence exist? Which, as I explained earlier, that means the non-existence of emptiness. I know it sounds weird but how can the non-existence of ultimate truth exist? That is this hypothetical question, which means emptiness exists to the appearance factor of this wisdom realizing emptiness directly. That's how that is contradicted. How can its non-existence exist? It cannot, because emptiness does exist. It does exist to the appearance factor of that wisdom that is realizing emptiness in this manner, in meditative equipoise. The third part, which had to do with that last line, line D, how can anyone anywhere assert it is or it is not? Geshe Choni says this is related to true existence and the lack of true existence, just as Geshe Gyatso said. From the perspective of the wisdom realizing emptiness directly, there is no assertion of things being truly existent and things being not truly existent. Those assertions are only made in a conceptual mind. They are not made in this direct perceptual mind. So he reiterates, this explanation is given in the context of what exists to the appearance factor of the wisdom realizing emptiness directly. So again, when the yogi is in meditative equipoise, or yogini, whoever it is, to that mind, the only thing that is appearing is emptiness. And it's in a non-dual manner where the mind is absorbed completely into that object of emptiness. No conventionalities appear. They aren't even aware of their own mind realizing emptiness. They aren't aware of any conventionalities. So again, those conventionalities don't exist. So how could anyone say that those existences do exist to that mind? Secondly, the non-existence of emptiness also cannot be said to exist because emptiness does exist to that mind. It is what's being realized. And thirdly, you cannot make any assertions within that meditative equipoise as to this doesn't exist or this does exist or any of these other things that are assertions that are made conventionally based on conceptual ideas, thoughts. Because this is not a thinking mind. This is a direct perceiving mind, a mind that is knowing emptiness in this very unique manner. That again is the goal of all of our spiritual practice. Now, I hope I'm not going to confuse you too much, but Geshe Choni says there's another way to interpret these three elements. He says, when we consider a more conventional way of explaining this, not talking about the meditative equipoise mind, which we don't know, right? Then the following explanation would apply. How can existence exist? Existence here means true existence. So when we talk about emptiness, we say that phenomena do not exist truly, inherently, independently, and so on. Therefore, this line is asking, how can phenomena established by way of their own character exist? Such phenomena do not exist at all. So if we aren't talking about the mind and meditative equipoise, we're just talking in general, well, how can inherent existence exist? This is what we're trying to prove to ourselves through all these reasonings, that it cannot, because things are dependent arisings, because they cannot be found to be inherently one or inherently different from their base and so on. Second element, how can non-existence exist? How can you then deny the existence of mere conventionality? Although phenomena do not exist truly, they do not exist. They do exist, I'm sorry, as mere conventionalities. So this is kind of saying, how can you uphold non-existence in its entirety? In other words, a nihilistic view. How can everything be utterly non-existent? Well, they can't, because things do still exist as mere conventionalities. They don't exist truly, because that's what we saw in the previous slide, right? Existence, when we mean true existence, cannot exist, but non-existence of things utterly cannot exist either. Things do still exist, but only as dependent arisings. The third element, how can anyone anywhere assert it is or it is not? His explanation of that in a more conventional way is because all phenomena do not exist truly, they exist as mere conventionalities. Since that is the case, how can anyone assert that there are truly existent phenomena? That would be the it is that's at the top of the screen, and that conventionalities do not exist. It is not. So this is kind of saying, how could anyone refute essentially the two extreme, or hold the two extremes? Instead, we refute the two extremes. To say it is inherently existent and it is not existent at all, those are the two extremes, right? Let me take it off screen and talk about those again. The middle way is this perfect, fine point between these two extremes. The extreme that we're in now and that we tend to fall into more often than not is, of course, that it is inherently existent, because we believe in that false appearance. It is existing in the way it appears. And that's what causes us to further our ignorance and keep doing the things that we're doing and all of what we've been talking about tonight, creating the causes and conditions for our own suffering and so on. But then we get to some exposure to emptiness and we think, oh, but it is not existence at all. Then I don't exist, karma doesn't exist, nothing exists, very nihilistic bent. Though neither of those can be asserted within this understanding of emptiness. True existence does not exist. Utter non-existence does not exist. We found the middle way between those. Therefore, you cannot fall into either of these extremes. Okay, so I hope that's good enough. And again, you'll get the slides and you can review what was on them to get some idea. Geshela Geshe Choni continues, not a single proponent of the middle way school would assert that there are truly existent phenomena and that there are no mere conventionalities. What was being put forward again in that last bit, that it is truly existent and it is not utterly, that is not existent at all. No one would assert that if you're a true proponent of the middle way, a true Madhyamaka. Again, there are that one branch of the Madhyamaka that hasn't gotten to this point yet. But if you're a true proponent of the middle way, then you're finding a way that is between those two extremes. And you don't deny the utter existence of things, nor do you hold to them to be inherently existent. Okay, finally on to verse 116, and then we have our dedication verse. This is about the indivisibility of appearances and the mind. Objects and the reality of objects do not exist. And if we abide quietly, without contrived intelligence, in the primordial state that is free from all adopting and discarding, and free from elaboration, we will become great beings. And in that third line, we mean free from all holding to inherent adopting and discarding and what have you. So if we are free from all of the misconceptions of things, free from elaborating them as inherently existent, and we abide quietly without any, contrived intelligence, rather with direct awareness, we will eventually become great beings. We become Buddhas. Now it is interesting. I'm going to show on the next screen an alternate translation of this that includes subjects. Remember the previous slide said that this has to do with the indivisibility of appearances and the mind, that these are again of one taste and emptiness. So this is what Thupten Jinpa says: there is no object, no subject, nor no ultimate nature of things inherently. None of these things exist inherently. Again, this isn't denying their utter existence, it's denying their inherent existence. So then he says, free of all ethical norms and conceptual elaborations, if I abide naturally with this uncontrived awareness in the ever-present innate state, I will become a great being. So if we let go of, again, kind of all those false conceptual elaborations and things adhering to there to be inherently existent karma and inherently existent causes and results and what have you, and we abide naturally with an uncontrived awareness, free of all of that, we will eventually become a great being through realizing emptiness directly. So let's go to Geshela's commentary on this. Hopefully I'll be able to finish everything up. I'm feeling pretty optimistic, even though we down to about 7 minutes. So Geshela says, thus, just as objects are not truly established, likewise the reality of objects, apart from being merely imputed over there by name and conception, is also not established from its own side. And of course we could include, as was Thupten Jinpa did, subjects. Subjective awarenesses are also not established from their own side. Then he continues, because of this, objects will include their subjects and the reality of objects, their emptiness, are free from all conventions that state. Ultimately, this is to be adopted, that is to be discarded, and so forth. Because such ultimate existence of these things do not exist. They don't exist inherently. Free from elaboration means that the mind that takes reality, emptiness, as its object is taught to be completely free from all conventional elaborations, as we saw above, right? That's the mind that is a direct perception that doesn't have any conceptual overlay at all. Geshela then says, if we try again and again to abide quietly, without contrived intelligence, that is, without distraction, on the mode of abidance that is like that, the primordial state, in no time at all, we will become great beings who directly realize emptiness. Okay, so let's go back to the slides, because I did want to share a little bit from Geshe Ngawang Dargye, his book, where he does talk a little bit about, just gives us some advice that's maybe good to hear. Such greatness can be achieved, but generally we lack enthusiastic perseverance. Our present deplorable condition of helplessness, both to ourselves and others, comes from our lack of effort in generating the two kinds of bodhicitta, which is what we've just concluded now, right? We went through conventional bodhicitta, now we've concluded ultimate bodhicitta. He says the Buddhas have this perseverance, that's what got them to that state of Buddhahood. We don't. So kind of saying it all comes down to your effort, your joyous enthusiasm for these teachings and applying them in your own mind. That's what it all comes down to. So verse 117 is the concluding verse, dedicating the merits to achieving the mind of enlightenment. In this way, by practicing the conventional mind of enlightenment and the ultimate mind of enlightenment, conventional bodhicitta, ultimate bodhicitta, may we culminate the two collections of merit through a method side of it and the collection of wisdom without interference, and then bring the two welfares, which are the culmination in your own truth body, your own welfare, as well as the welfare of others through the form bodies. May we bring the two welfares to perfection. And here I'll just hearken back to that chart that I showed twice previously, that's in your slides, in other areas, other days, where we see that those are the two tracks. The top part that's underneath the blue, that conventional truths and so on the that line, that all has to do with how we fulfill the purpose of others, how we develop the form bodies through the collection of merit, through the various things we practice, through abandoning our self-centeredness, our self-cherishing, using the method aspect of the path based on conventional truths. And then if we go far to the right for the last one, we see that we accomplish the truth body, which is the fulfillment of our own purpose through the development of wisdom, collecting that by meditating on emptiness, thus removing the self-grasping ignorance through the culmination of wisdom that is based on ultimate truths, the emptiness of all phenomena. Okay, so let's go back to our text and get this under our belts. Okay, so Geshela says, we say in this way, that is, in accordance with the meaning of the previous explanations, having seen self-cherishing to be the root of all faults and cherishing others to be the root of all qualities, may I meditate on the conventional mind of enlightenment by means of striving in the practice of equalizing and exchanging myself and others, which again involves Tonglen, which we saw in that whole first part of the text, right? After that, may I settle the meaning of emptiness by means of many scriptures, logical reasonings, examples, and arguments, and then meditate on the ultimate mind of enlightenment, that is, the sequential generation of the three wisdoms of hearing, thinking, and meditating that realize emptiness, the mode of abidance of all phenomena. Then, through the strength of having striven to practice a union of these two minds of enlightenment, may I culminate the two collections of merit and wisdom without interference. And then may I manifest the two, the truth and form bodies. That is, may I easily obtain the perfect glory of the two welfares, my own welfare through the truth body and the welfare of others through the form bodies. So then Geshe-la concludes, he says, with a completely pure prayer, this text is brought to conclusion. So I do want to read that little bit of the colophon here. I'm not going to read all of it, but it says here, the meaning of saying in the colophon to this text, that called the wheel of sharp weapons that strikes the enemy's vital point, is as has been explained before. When we went through the text, right? The statement, in the midst of a jungle in which diverse species of frightening beasts roam, refers to the fact that the place in which the great Lama Dharmarakshita composed this text was in the midst of a jungle in which diverse species of ferocious and frightening beasts, such as tigers, lions, and the like, roamed. It was composed by a yogi who was realized in scripture and reasoning, the great Dharmarakshita. So then it goes on to a colophon for the commentary and so on. But instead, there is actually additional bit in this book that I have here that some of you have seen before. It's the Essential Mind Training. It's the short version of the longer mind training text. And Thupten Jinpa has a little bit more on this, and I just want to share this with you, and then we'll wrap things up. These are additional comments in the colophon, apparently. Dharmarakshita gave this teaching to Atisha, who, in order to transform many sentient beings so difficult to tame, undertook this practice throughout all places where sentient beings lie, whether in the cardinal or intermediate directions. As Atisha experienced the realizations of this practice, he uttered the following lines. When I renounced my kingdom and practiced austerity, I accumulated merit and met with my supreme teacher, of course, who is Dharmarakshita. He revealed to me this sublime Dharma nectar and initiated me into it. Having mastered the antidotes today, I commit the words to my heart. By casting wide my intelligence, free of prejudice, upon a detailed study of diverse doctrinal systems, I have witnessed immeasurable wonders, but I've found this teaching most helpful to our degenerate age. So we kind of get that little bit from Atisha, and of course he lived 1,000 years ago, and yet he found these teachings at that time to be most helpful to the age that he was living in, which we're still in that degenerate age, still dealing with degeneration of all sorts of things that are actually making this an opportune time to practice mind training, to practice the Mahayana mind training that we've looked at in this text. So I want to do a little bit of a dedication that comes from the last two paragraphs of Thupten Chodron's book, but let me first check and see if there are any questions. I realize we're at 8 o'clock now, but feel free to ask, because it's going to be a while before you see me again, I imagine, at least for Taos. Anyone? Okay. All right. So again, you raised your hand, Laura. Yeah, please unmute yourself and yeah.
Can you hear me? I was wondering about
Yeah.
the graph that you put up
Okay.
With the bodhicitta, ultimate bodhicitta, and conventional bodhicitta.
Hmm.
I was going to take a photo of it on my phone unless there's somewhere that I could access that
Well,
chart.
if you get the slides, it'll be in the slides. You're
It'll
on
be,
Sarah's list, yeah.
oh,
It'll
that's
be there, but
right.
I can put it back on the screen for just a moment if you want. If you, it's also again in Venerable Tipton Chodron's book,
Oh,
but that's the slide. This chart, which I have to give the entire credit to Venerable Tipton Chodron. It's a really nice chart that sort of encompasses everything that is involved, not just in this text, but in all of our mind training texts. Remember, these are the twin demons that are in that third column. The two enemies that are to be vanquished are self-centeredness, self-cherishing, as well as the self-grasping. And this is a wonderful way of kind of showing everything that is involved in that. Okay?
yeah, thank you. I got it. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions before we do some dedication? Okay, so it's unfortunate that we don't have Paimene with us to recite the list of names. Does anyone else have access to them? No, I don't think so. No. So let's, before we recite these verses, let's think very strongly about dedicating for the welfare of all those beings that we're holding in our hearts. We can certainly say all those beings who are on the list, whose names haven't been read, but we are holding them all very close to our hearts right now, dedicating for their welfare. All those other beings that we've been asked to pray for, that we've offered to pray for, whoever these beings are, we dedicate for their welfare so that they might be free from their suffering and find all the causes that will lead them to perfect peace and happiness. And we go to these verses and we'll start with these and then maybe we'll go to what, oh, John's going to share his thing. John, if you could wait to share that. Thank you. And we'll go to the ones I wanted to share, which are from Tipton Children's book. It's just actually the last couple paragraphs of her book, and I think they're really sweet, and we can maybe read these together. May we always have a sense of gratitude for the Buddha and all these sages who learned, practiced, realized, and taught the thought training teachings. And may we pay it forward by practicing them well and sharing them with others. May all the merit we create by our study and practice ripen in the long lives and good health of our Dharma teachers. May they compassionately teach and guide us until samsara ends. May the Dharma exist in pure forms forever, and may practitioners everywhere be harmonious and mutually support each other. May each sentient being attain the full awakening of a Buddha. Okay, so now, John, if you can put the other normal, usual dedication prayers on the screen, we'll recite those together as well. Again, dedicating first all this merit for the sake of attaining enlightenment, as well as to recall bodhicitta and how important it is that we grow both conventional bodhicitta as well as eventually ultimate bodhicitta. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Then, just as that one what we just read from Venerable Tipton Chodron's book, we want to make sure we dedicate for the good health and long lives of all these amazing Dharma teachers, the ones for whom we're saying prayers now, as well as all those other beings who are fulfilling that role in our world. May they continue to abide with good health, long lives, and may we and all beings always have perfect guides in all our lives. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And then for Lama Yeshe's reincarnation, Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. Okay, thank you so much. I do want to mention that, I was offering this with the intention that if you wanted to take this as a part of the basic program certification, that more formal way of doing this study, that I would send along any sorts of, quizzes, homework, what have you. You could still do that. If you're interested in doing that, maybe let Eloise or Sarah or whoever know. They'll get your name to me, or if you have my, email address, you can write to me directly. There is a little test that you can take at the conclusion of all of this study, but it is good, to do the homework because it'll be based on the homework. So if you haven't been keeping up with that and doing that, of course, I don't think I got many requests for the homework, so I imagine most of you haven't. But if you would like to receive the homework, go through and restudy the text on your own, you're still welcome to do that. I mean, if you've attended most of these classes, by all means, you can go forward and, at least get this one course certified, and then maybe think about doing the additional 8 courses that are involved in the basic program. And I hope to see all of you again before too long. I am working with Taos and some of the other groups on a new pilot program for FPMT that I'm hoping we can offer to as many of the communities as we can. And so I'm working on that. Did you want to say anything, Eloise, about next week and what happens when Geshela returns in 2 weeks?
Uh, no, we'll put that out in a letter. But I
Okay.
do want to say thank you from all of us for your incredibly clear presentation of this phenomenal text.
Yep.
And all of your scholarship and your internalizing and you're able to explain your ability to explain it. We just thank you so much for that.
Oh, you're too kind, Eloise. I owe all that to my teachers. If I didn't have such amazing teachers, I wouldn't be able to say a word of Dharma that was meaningful. So thank you for your comments, and I'll pass that along to them. So, anyway, all right. So any other comments or questions? We can, so again, stay tuned to Sarah's email. I won't be teaching next week. I don't know what'll be happening, if you will have class or not. And then Geshela will resume. It's exciting that you'll have Geshela back. And I hope to again see all of you again fairly soon with this new class. And then hopefully again later on at some point. My schedule's so up in the air right now, I don't know what I'm doing. I do know what I'm doing to some degree. And if you're interested, you can actually go to my website, donhandrick.com, and I do have posted my schedule through August. So you have some idea of what I'm doing. But there may be some additional things inserted. For example, this program that I'm doing, this pilot of, I don't have that out there yet for this region. I do have it for the West Coast. I'm starting that in May. But anyway, if you're curious about any of that, you can go to my schedule at my website. But all right, everyone, I'm going to miss you, and I feel bad that we don't get a chance to see each other in person this time, but hopefully that'll happen before too long. So please stay safe and healthy, and I'll see you soon.